Move forward into this next video, we are going to start constructing a little level and setting up our basic lighting. For our project, we will start to lay out a basic level. Okay, let's get started by creating a new blank level. To do that, let's navigate to our root content folder in the content browser. Now, let's create a new folder by right-clicking and selecting New Folder. Now let's rename that folder to Levels, and let's open it up. Okay, great. Now, levels are effectively the container for a scene we want to make. The average project will consist of multiple levels, but must have at least one. It is within a level that our assets, lights, effects, sounds, and all other asset types will live. Let's go ahead and create our first level. Right-click and under the Create section, choose Level. Let's rename it to My First Level. Okay, great. Now let's double-click it and open it up. If prompted, choose to save or discard your level, whatever you see fit. Okay, great. Now you should be looking at a scene that is 100% blank. Now let's go ahead and use UE4's context-sensitive search to find SM_EXO_bridge and drag one of the floor tile assets into the level. Now, there are things you may notice when you do this. First, that upon dropping the asset into the level, nothing visually happened. And secondly, that your world outliner seems to have added the asset. Curious, huh? Why, if it is in the outliner, do we not actually see it? Well, UE4 is much like the real world. It tries to make sure that all the math works as naturally as possible, and it does this by using physically based materials. As with the real world, without light, there can be nothing seen. Our eyes work entirely off reflected light, and so does UE4. Therefore, if we want to see anything, we need to have a source of light. It's an important concept we will always need to consider, especially as scenes and their lighting become more complex. Okay, so to add our first light, let's go ahead and drop a simple directional light into the scene. We can find the directional light in the Light section of the Mode panel. Once found, just drag it into your scene. You should now be able to see that little tile sitting there. Okay, so when we dragged in the tile, it may have been placed anywhere in our scene, as we have yet to give it a true position. We can easily do this by using the Details panel and typing in 0 tab 0 tab 0 and pressing the return in the location vector inputs. We can also use the F key to focus the viewport since it is probably moved out of the view somewhat. Let's also select our directional light and set it to something like 0, 0, 100. This way it'll be centered on our scene but raised off the floor a little bit. In the top right of our viewport, let's go ahead and set snapping to more closely match the size of our tiles and make it a little easier for us to quickly lay out a floor. In the drop-down panel, let's select a snap of 100 to make it a bit easier to line up our tiles. Great. Okay, now let's go ahead and hold the Alt key while dragging the tile with the Move tool. Notice that it makes a duplicate of the tile. Let's go ahead and drag out a total of 5 for our first row. Cool. So now we know how to duplicate assets in our level rather quickly. Notice that these duplicates are auto-populated in our outliner as well. Since our floor should still be a bit bigger, let's go ahead and select all 5 in the outliner. Now let's repeat our Alt-drag operation to duplicate all the selected tiles quickly another 5 times. We should now have a 25 square floor plan. So now we have a little floor we can work with. Let's go ahead and give our level its first playtest. In the top ribbon panel, let's select the play button. When we do so, our character will be spawned, and depending on where in our level your camera is, you will either land on the tiles or fall endlessly through the level. We have found our first bug. To fix this rather simple bug, we simply need a player start. We can find one of those in the Modes panel. Let's type in Start in the Modes panel search and drag the player start to our game. While we are at it, let's set the position to 0, 0, 200 in the Details panel. Great. Now our character should begin right in the center of our tiles. Let's give it another test. Awesome. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, having a pure black background is cool, I guess, but I'm betting a bit of a sky might be even better. Let's now add our next lighting component, atmospheric fog. It too can be found in the Modes panel by searching for fog. Let's go ahead and drag it in and set its position to 0, 0, 300. Perfect. Now we get a nice simple horizon and some soft haze. We can control the fog in the Details panel, and tinkering with it can give us some nice softening effects for distant objects. You may also notice there is an emulated sunspot in the fog. We can attach this fog to a directional light to more accurately represent the sun. Let's go ahead and do that now. First, select our directional light in the Details panel. Then let's search for fog. You should now see atmospheric fog sun light. Let's go ahead and check it on. Immediately, you should see the color of the fog adjust to our skylight's color. If we select our directional light and rotate it, you should also see that the sunspot follows correctly, and it even adjusts accurately as the sun dips towards the horizon. The next item intrinsic to lighting is our reflection capture. Let's add a spherical reflection capture from the Modes menu. Simply search for reflection and you should see it. Now, set its position to 0, 0, 500. Great. Now we just need to get it to capture our scene. To do that, click on the side of the Build panel and drag down to Build Reflection Captures, and then Release. Once complete, you will now have a more believable reflection profile. Okay, great. We have the beginnings of a nice level. At this point, you should be more comfortable moving around your scene, and placing and positioning assets should start to feel natural. Let's now take some time to play with the content and add some additional assets to our scene. There are a ton of assets buried in this project to help your scene come to life, and an easy way to quickly locate them is using filtering. For example, we know we are going to want to find all the static meshes we can place in our level. By using a filter, we can quickly accomplish this. First, let's clear our content search, then under Filters, enable the static mesh. Notice the new filter button available right below the content search. This allows you to quickly enable and disable that filter. So when enabled, we can now see every static mesh in our project in one easy-to-review list. Super useful, huh? Okay, so now that we can see all the placeable meshes in our scene, go ahead and start dragging some of the assets into your scene and create something you are happy with. It shouldn't take long to start to create something rather cool. To give you an idea what is possible in the kit you now have at your disposal, this is where I took my level to. But I did give myself a nice walled area to work with, and using the assets in the list, you should be able to do something similar. Don't feel pressured to make a masterpiece, but do spend some time trying to make something visually interesting. So as we move deeper into the lighting, we have something more dynamic than a floor to work with. You may have some nice forms starting to show, and hopefully the landscape you created is a bit dynamic. If you got really into it, you may have even started adding in some little details like statues, barrels, etc. There are also some things you probably struggled with a little bit. Hopefully, however, you are happy with what is in front of you, and you feel a bit more confident dragging things into your level and adjusting their positions, rotations, and scales as needed. If so, nice work. Unless you jumped ahead and added in more lights, the lighting should be rather harsh and the shadows are black. We also have nothing at all dynamic with our lighting. It's just flat and kind of boring looking. The most glaring issue is that we have no fill light of any kind to take out these shadows. We only have a direction light. Therefore, if in shadow, there is no light hitting it at all. In real time, it is very difficult to calculate that kind of light. Traditionally, that light is called bounced light. We do, however, have a type of light that happens to be purpose-built to help us with that. It is called a skylight, and it can be also found in the Modes panel. It will give us the ambient lighting we need, so let's drag that in, and let's set its position to 0, 0, 400. Amazing. Our shadows are already vastly improved. Great. Now, it may be tempting to make adjustments to the skylight to control its ambient power. I would suggest not doing that, however. Generally, the defaults will be correct and give a good indication that the lighting itself needs to be adjusted, not the ambient properties. Now that we have ambient light, we will begin to see our next issue. As we move around our scene and go towards darker areas and lighter areas, you will likely notice that the overall exposure seems to be compensating. That's because it is. And as cool a feature as it may be, it is not very helpful when you're trying to get your light balanced. We need a stable exposure in order to get our lighting right. In order to control this aspect of our rendering and many others, we have a useful tool called a post-process volume. With it, we can affect all cameras in the scene from a singular control. Let's go ahead and grab one from our Modes panel and drop it into our scene. Just search for Post, and it should come right up. Great. Now let's go ahead and set its position to 0, 0, 0. Next, let's slide on down to the Lens section and look for the exposure min and max. Let's set them both to 1. This will force adaptive exposure to be locked at the default exposure. Lastly, let's do a quick search in the post-process volume for infinite, and make sure that infinite extent is enabled. This will give it complete domain over our level rather than contained to a specific area. Now if we look around, we should have a very stable exposure. Excellent. The next addition we will make to our scene will be to add a sky sphere. Simply type sky in the mode search panel, and you should see BP_sky_sphere. Once found, drag it into your scene and set its position also to 0, 0, 0. Great. Like the atmospheric fog, the sky sphere is best when linked to a directional light. Let's go ahead and use the drop-down labeled Directional Light actor to do that. Just select your directional light and you should see the change. Now we have a nicer sky that we have more control over. Feel free to tinker with the controls, but I'm going to leave this all at default. Excellent. At this point, we have a perfectly acceptable environment lighting setup. We just need to dial it in. Before we do that, however, let's make sure all of our elements for lighting are organized so that we can easily adjust things. In the World Outliner, Control-click to multi-select our Sky Sphere, Direction Light, Atmospheric Fog, and Skylight. Next, right-click and select Move to New Folder. Name that folder World Lighting. The exclamation point will ensure it stays on top of our list so we can easily access it for overall lighting setup. Perfect. Now, starting with the direction light, let's adjust our brightness. Let's set it down to 1. That should give us a nice duskish intensity. Excellent. Things are already feeling a bit better. Using the Rotate tool, let's get our sun to be situated closer to the horizon so it feels a bit more like dusk lighting. You will notice that as you rotate the directional light, the sunspot no longer updates. Simply disable your sky sphere for the moment, and you will be able to see your sunspot update normally. Once you get your sun in a nice low position on the horizon, simply re-enable your sky sphere and click the Refresh Material button. Perfect. The sun is right where I want it. Next, let's go ahead and get our sunspot to start acting a little more like a sun. Alive. If we look into the sky and take note of our sun, it's okay, but it certainly lacks any kind of charisma. To give it some life, let's jump over to our direction light and enable Light Shaft Occlusion and Light Shaft Bloom. This will give us a halo around our sun. If you drift around your scene, you should see that the obscuring objects help define the shape and cast of the light. Awesome, but wow, it's ugly and wildly out of control. No worries though. If we jump into our sky sphere, we can adjust the intensity quite easily by setting sun brightness to around 1. Then, back in our directional light, we can fine-tune the look with our bloom scale. In short order, you should have some beautiful God rays streaming into your scene. Excellent. Okay, now that we have our scene looking fairly good, we just need to add some dynamism to our scene. Right now we have no visual movement, nor do we have much interplay of light. It is sorely needed here, so in the next tutorial I'm going to introduce you to the idea and concept of an actor. With actors, we will create and place some highly engaging fiery lamps to add that last bit of magic to our scene.